Hello, everybody. Welcome to my daily Bible reading. We are up to Acts chapter 24. If you want to turn there in your scriptures, as we read our opening prayer, which is the Shema found in Deuteronomy 6:4-9. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad, Baruch Shem Kibbo, Mahuto Leolam Vahed. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. And you should love Yahweh with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And have these words which I command you this day be upon your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you retire and when you rise. And you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and let them be frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorpost of your house and upon your gates. Hallelujah. All right. So we are up to chapter 24. We read, 5 days later, Ananias the high priest arrived with some of the Jewish elders and the lawyer Tertullus to present their case against Paul to the governor. And as we read chapter 24, it starts off in verse 1, and it says, the accusers arrived, and Ananias the high priest, Tertullus the lawyer, and several Jewish leaders. They traveled 60 miles to Caesarea, the Roman center of government, to bring their false accusations against Paul. Their murder plot had failed, but they persisted in trying to kill him. This attempt at murder was both premeditated and persistent. And verse 2 reads, when Paul was called in, Tertullus presented the charges against Paul in the following address to the governor. You have provided a long period of peace for us Jewish people, and with foresight have enacted reforms for us. And it says here in the note, Tertullus was a special orator called to present the religious leader's case before the Roman governor. He made 3 accusations against Paul. Number 1, he was a troublemaker stirring up riots among the Jewish people around the world. Number 2, he was a ringleader of an unrecognized religious cult, which was against the Roman law. And number 3, he had tried to desecrate the temple. The religious leaders hoped that these accusations would persuade Felix to execute Paul in order to keep peace in Palestine. And we read verse 3. For all this, Your Excellency, we are very grateful to you. In verse 4, but I don't want to bore you, so please give me your attention for only a moment. We have found this man to be a troublemaker who is consistently stirring up riots among the Jewish people all over the world. He is a ringleader of the cult known as the Nazarenes. In verse 5 here, the note says, while the charge that Paul was a troublemaker was insulting to Paul, it was too vague to be substantive legal charge. The Nazarenes refers to the Christian named here after Yeshua's home of Nazareth. And in verse 6 it says, furthermore, he was trying to desecrate the temple when we arrested him. Now there's no number 7 in the New Living Testament. It skips number 7. But if we look at the One New Man Bible, verse number 7 says, then Lucas, a commander, took him from our hands with great force. And the note here says, it is not in the earliest manuscripts, added about the 8th century. That was for verse number 7. And that was the One New Man Bible. And the Hebraic root scriptures for verse 7 says, it took him away much force, so it is in there as well. But that wasn't in the earliest manuscript, so they left it out in the New Living Testament. Verse 8 reads, you can find out the truth of our accusations by examining him yourself. Then the other Jewish people chimed in, declaring that everything Tertullus said was true. And verse 10. The governor then motioned for Paul to speak. Paul said, I know, sir, you have been a judge of the Jewish affairs for many years, so I gladly present my defense before you. And the note here says, Tertullus and the religious leaders seemed to have a strong argument against Paul, but Paul refuted their accusations point by point. Paul was also able to present the good news through his defense. Paul's accusers were unable to present specific evidence to support their general accusations. For example, Paul was accused of starting trouble among the Jewish people in the province of Asia, but the Jewish people in the province of Asia were not present to confirm this. This is another example of Paul using every opportunity to witness for Yeshua. So these are the verses in 10. And then 11 says, you can quickly discover that I arrived in Jerusalem more than 12 days ago to worship at the temple. My accusers never found me arguing with anyone in the temple, nor stirring up a riot in any synagogue or in the streets of the city. These men cannot prove the things they are accusing me of doing. Verse 14 says, but I admit that I follow the way which they call a cult. I worship the God of our ancestors, and I firmly believe the Jewish law and everything written in the prophets. It says here in the note on the One New Man Bible, the Torah and the prophets here refers to the entire Jewish Bible. And verse 15, he continues. He says, I have the same hope in God that these men have, that he will raise both the righteous and the unrighteous. Because of this, I always try to maintain a clear conscience before God and all people. And he writes in 17, after several years away, I returned to Jerusalem with money to aid my people and to offer sacrifices to God. My accusers saw me in the temple as I was completing a purification ceremony. There was no crowd around me and no rioting. But some of the Jewish people from the province of Asia were there, and they ought to be here to bring charges if they have anything against me. Ask these men here what crime the Jewish High Council found me guilty of, except for the one time I shouted out, I am on trial before you today because I believe in the resurrection of the dead. And now we read verse 22 that says, at that point, Felix, who was quite familiar with the way, adjourned the hearing and said, wait until Lysistrus, the garrison commander, arrives. Then I will decide the case. The note here in 22 in the One New Man Bible says Lysistrus would come down to the coast from the inland, 3,000-foot elevation of Jerusalem, south of Caesarea. And the note for verse 22 here in the New Living Testament says, Felix had been governor for 6 years and would have known about the way, a topic of conversation among the Roman leaders. The Christians' peaceful lifestyle had already been proving to the Romans that the Christians didn't go around starting riots. And the verse 23 says, he ordered an officer to keep Paul in custody, but to give him some freedom and allow his friends to visit him and take care of his needs. Verse 24. A few days later, Felix came back with his wife, Drusilla, who was Jewish, sending for Paul, and they listened as he told them about faith in Yeshua the Messiah. Verse 25. As he reasoned with them about righteousness and self-control and of the coming day of judgment, Felix became frightened. Go away for now, he replied. When it is more convenient, I will call you again. The note here says Paul's talk with Felix became so personal that Felix grew frightened. Felix, like Herod Antipas, had taken another man's wife. Paul's words were interesting until they focused on the righteous and self-control and the coming day of judgment. Many people will be glad to discuss the good news with you as long as it doesn't touch their lives too personally. But when it does, some will resist or run. But this is what the good news is all about. Yahweh's power to change lives. The good news is not effective until it moves from principles and doctrines into life-changing dynamic. When someone resists or runs from your witness, you have doubtably succeeded in making the good news personal. Verse 26 reads, he also hoped that Paul would bribe him, so he sent for him quite often and talked with him. Verse 27, after 2 years went by in this way, Felix was succeeded by Pontius Fetus. And because Felix wanted to gain favor with the Jewish people, he left Paul in prison. Verse 27 here says, the Jewish people were in the majority, and the Roman political leaders wanted to defer to them to help keep their peace. Paul seemed to incite problems among the Jewish people everywhere he went. By keeping him in prison, Felix left office on good terms with the Jewish people. Felix lost his job as governor and was called back to Rome. Porcius Fetus took over as governor in late 59 or early 60. He was more just than Felix, who had kept Paul in prison for 2 years in hopes that perhaps Paul would bribe him and that by defending Paul, the Jewish people would be kept happy. When Fetus came into office, he immediately ordered Paul's trial to resume. Another note for verse 27 says, though Yahweh had promised that Paul would preach the gospel in Rome, the great apostle had to endure more than 2 years of Felix's refusal to decide his faith. In addition to this custody, Paul was subjected to other long stretches of time during which he could do little but trust Yahweh and wait for him to act. What do you do when it comes to the issue of waiting for Yahweh? Do you become anxious, angry, or discouraged? Few things test our patience and faith like being focused to wait, which perhaps explains why our sovereign Elohim often puts us in situations where we have no other choice. That was the note for 27 and the end of chapter 24. And then next we're going to pick it up and seeing Paul appearing before Festus and the trial continuing. All right. Thank you for reading along with me on chapter 24 of the book of Acts. Keep reading your word every day. And don't forget to pray. Hallelujah. All right, everybody. We'll be back in our next episode with another chapter. Have a blessed day. Yahweh be with you all, and shalom, shalom.